All right, WHAP students, welcome back. This is chapter 9. Always a tough chapter anytime we're dealing with India. And this chapter is classical India, roughly that time period of 600 BCE to 600 CE. That, you know, 5 or 6 chapters we're talking about, we'll cover that time period. But India is always a little bit more difficult, probably than any of the other ones. So, what you need to know is that there are two main dynasties in this time period: the Mauryan dynasty and the Gupta dynasty. So that part's pretty simple, kind of like China had the Qin and the Han. In this time period, India has the Mauryans and the Gupta. India very rarely has any kind of kingdom or empire that conquers or controls very much territory in India. India is a large place, not as large as China, but it is a large place. But it never sees that overall domination that you see in China and some of the other places that we'll talk about in the classical time period. Now, Alexander the Great had come in like 320 BCE in that time period, and he had very briefly conquered northeastern India, but then his men abruptly said, "Hey, we're going home." So he turns and leaves, and it leaves a power vacuum. This smaller kingdom of Magadha used that power vacuum to their advantage, and they kind of started gaining power and taking over new territory. Well, while they got this started, a man that you need to know by the name of Chandragupta swept in, and he basically took up where the kingdom Magadha started, and he just kind of basically exploded into this fairly large empire called the Mauryan dynasty. So Mauryan dynasty founded by Chandragupta. Now, Chandragupta, tradition holds that eventually he would actually abdicate his throne, meaning that he gave it up to become a monk. Something turned him off from the idea of ruling, and he kind of just basically runs away from his responsibilities and becomes a monk somewhere out there, okay? You need to know that it was his grandson, Ashoka, very, very important, who was the greatest, probably the greatest Indian emperor of all, but certainly the greatest emperor of the Mauryan dynasty. He's famous for stone pillar edicts. Basically, he wrote his guidelines and his rules for his empire on these massive stone pillars all over the place so people could see them. But he done a ton of great things. He increased trade for India. He came into this thing as a conqueror. He's expanding, and conquerors can be pretty brutal. But where he really makes his mark is actually as a governor. When you kind of compare him to Persia, when we talked about Cyrus being the conqueror, but Darius Great coming in and being that great administrator. That's kind of how Ashoka is. He becomes known for his administration abilities. Very centralized. He has a very tight bureaucracy. He has a lot of people that run in the show, and they all answer directly to him. He pushes Buddhism. He had converted to Buddhism, and because he was Buddhist, he did kind of push that on people that were predominantly Hindu. Buddhism being a much newer religion than Hinduism, which is the world's oldest religion. His great building of roads helped encourage trade, very, very important, long distance trade. Unfortunately for the Mauryan dynasty, when he died around 232 BCE, decline sets in almost immediately. They've got a lot of issues. One of the big issues is that they have this very large military that they're paying decent money, who aren't doing anything. They're sitting around getting paid for doing nothing. They're not fighting. That's pretty much peacetime, and that one of the things that helped kind of bankrupt the Mauryan dynasty. So after they fall, similar to China, it's going to kind of go into some regional kingdoms, but it's not chaos and anarchy or anything like that. It's just no great dynasties, no centralized power there in India until about 100 years later when the Gupta dynasty would arise. Now, the Gupta dynasty was also founded, and this gets tricky, by Chandragupta. But this is Chandra Space Gupta. Make sure that you're reading your notes and you know the difference between the two men. Chandragupta, one word, founder of the Mauryan dynasty. Chandra Space Gupta, founder of the Gupta dynasty. Much smaller dynasty, but they conquered most of India except for that southern tip called the Deccan Plateau down there that you guys, when you're doing your map studies, you should see. Incredibly safe society. People that visited from Greece and other places like that remarked about how you could walk around and you never worried about being mugged or anything like that. So very good dynasty. A tremendous math and science advancements. You might argue that they were the most advanced math and science place on earth at the time, maybe more so even than the Chinese were at the time, and the Greeks at the time, Romans. They had a tremendous production of agriculture, and long-term theme. More food equals more growth. Okay, so they're farming well, which leads to a massive boom in population in the classical period. Have tremendous growth of towns. Part of that's the roads, part of it's their science and engineering and stuff. But there's going to be a lot of towns growing, going to increase the economy of India. Um, Indian Ocean trade is one of the most immensely important things that we'll talk about in AP World History. Tremendous luxury items like silk and pearls and cotton and peppers and spices and stuff like this that are in the Indian Ocean trade. Africa is a huge part of the Indian Ocean trade. India, China, Southeast Asia, Malaysia, Philippines, all those islands are all a part of it. And much later in the late 1400s and 1500s, Europe will start killing each other off to try to get in the Indian Ocean trade. So tremendously important, the Indian Ocean trade is. Very patriarchal society, much like China and Greece and these other places we talked about. Very patriarchal. In the Gupta time period, you're going to see a lot of child marriages and stuff, where these young girls are going to be married off to older men. Sometimes for goats and stuff like that, traded off pretty cheap sometimes. So a lot of patriarchy there. The women were not expected to have any kind of public affairs. Their job was at home, no public voice at all. The husband's voice was their voice when it came to public. You also see a tremendous growth of, because towns are getting larger, you see a tremendous growth of guilds. And the guilds kind of fit into that caste system. When we talk about India, we'll always talk about caste systems. But you kind of had the four main caste systems, and you had all these little subcasts that get created because of guilds. These guilds are basically called jati. So make sure you know jati. It's pretty easy to remember. There's as many as 1,800 jatis in Indian society. So if you were a carpenter, that was your jati. That was your guild. If you were a stonemason, that was your guild. During this time period, classical time period, because there's tremendous growth in towns and economics and stuff, you kind of see an upsetting of the balance of the caste system. The Brahmins, the priests have been at the top. The warriors have been in the second class. And then you had the Shudras and the Kshitras who were at the bottom. Well, they start making money because they're getting involved in kind of these manufacturing centers and stuff. And so as they start getting money, it starts upsetting the balance, because money is power. Last little bit with India here, we're going to talk about religion. Now, Hinduism is the world's oldest organized religion. It had been around for thousands of years before our other organized religions that we'll talk about later show up. But there are a couple new ones that are going to pop around this time period. One of them is Jainism. Jainism is pretty easy to remember, and it's pretty specific to India. Basically, they believe that all creatures in the universe had a soul. They would wear veils so that they wouldn't accidentally inhale an insect and end its life. They would sweep the path in front of them so that they wouldn't accidentally crush insects and stuff like that. It's just kind of crazy, but they actually still survive today. There's a significant population of Jainis still in India today. Mostly elitist. When you're a poor person, you've got to eat the cow. You can't stand on morals and ethics on that. It's about survival. So it was mostly rich people that, could afford to do this. They would be vegans and stuff like that. The biggest change in the classical period, of course, when it comes to religion, is the foundation of Buddhism. Buddhism was founded by a man you must know, and his name is Siddhartha Gautama. Buddha itself means enlightened one. Now, he's an awesome story. We're going to talk about him. He was born rich. He was born a prince. Prophecy says that he'd be born with this birthmark, and that he had two options: that he could grow to be a great prince, or he could leave all of his possessions behind, and that he could become this worldly spiritual leader. So his father basically kept him under house arrest because he didn't want the second part of the prophecy coming true. And Buddha married and had a small child before he just could not handle his gilded cage anymore. He's imprisoned in a nice place, but it's still a prison. And he is, the story goes that he escaped, several times, 3 or 4 times. And each time he escaped, he saw something like a sick man, a holy man, a dead man. And all these things helped enlighten him. And basically he ran away. He ran away from his wife, he ran away from his child and his life as a prince, and wandered the world essentially a beggar. People helped him eat. He sat under a fig tree supposedly for 49 days, just surviving off of the acorns and stuff that dropped from the tree until he basically got figured out the meaning of life, if you will. So Buddhism is a major religion, but you must know that Buddhism never kicks Hinduism out. Hinduism will always be the dominant religion of India. In fact, Islam later on will come in and will become a significant portion of India. Buddhism will actually become much more popular in China and in Japan, okay? But it does get its foundations there in India. Now, in this time period, Hinduism, although it's ancient, it's still very old. In this time period, there's a lot of more materialistic wealth coming along. You're going to see a drop in the power of the Brahmins, those priests that led all the ceremonies and could basically tell people to do whatever they wanted. Hinduism's evolving to the materialism that develops during the classical age. People are getting richer. People have better standard of living than they used to back in the old days, if you will. So keep those things in mind. And remember, this is all just an overview. If you don't take very good notes, India is going to be a very big challenge for you. Thank you.